A watershed moment for India's Me Too movement, only it's not he says, she says, but rather he sues, they come forth. Distinguished newspaperman and academic M.K. Akbar says he's quitting as Junior Secretary for External Affairs to clear his good name when he decided to sue journalist Priya Ramani for criminal defamation. At least 19 other women came forward with claims of harassment by Akbar. Ramani, by the way, is the one on trial, and not Akbar. She faces up to 2 years behind bars if convicted. We'll see why this and other cases are coming to light now, and how it will eventually impact the fortunes of Akbar's BJP party in next year's elections. The BJP, a Hindu nationalist party in a nation where traditional gender values are deeply ingrained, run beyond religious lines. In the southern state of Kerala, where for the second day running, militants have resisted a Supreme Court order to lift a centuries-old ban on women of menstruating age from entering the Sabarimala temple. The question is, was the court in its right when it weighed in on a religious matter and ruled that the ban was discriminatory? Today in the France 24 debate, we're looking at India's Me Too moment. Joining us from New Delhi, Shatapa Paul, founder, editor of New Crop, the video platform. Many thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Also joining us from the Indian capital, Vidisha Mishra, Associate Fellow at the Observer Research Foundation. Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
And here in the studio, Ingrid Turvat, journalist at Courrier International, which is the weekly publication and also online, which brings French viewers the best of the world's press.
Hello, good evening.
Thanks for joining us. Our invitation, by the way, to representatives of the government, sadly unanswered for this discussion, the France 24 debate, on Facebook and Twitter, hashtag F24debate. As we were saying, the journalist could face up to 2 years behind bars. The now former minister won't be facing charges. Statute of limitation it has run out for him. The government says it's going to reform harassment laws. Claire Muffson has more.
A watershed moment in India's burgeoning Me Too movement. Last week, journalist Priya Ramani accused top government official M.J. Akbar of sexual harassment during his previous career as one of the country's most prominent news editors.
You're an expert on obscene phone calls, texts, inappropriate compliments, and not taking no for an answer. You know how to pinch, pat, rub, grab, and assault. Speaking up against you still carries a heavy price that many young women cannot afford to pay.
20 other women have since come forward. They say he interviewed job candidates in hotel rooms at night and groped and forcibly kissed interns and young employees fresh out of university. Akbar denied the allegations and on Monday filed a defamation suit against Ramani. That same day, protesters took to the streets, demanding that he resign. On Wednesday, he did, but he didn't back down.
Since I have decided to seek justice in a court of law in my personal capacity, I deem it appropriate to step down from office and challenge false accusations leveled against me.
India's Me Too movement has been slow to pick up steam, but some 35 prominent men have been accused in recent weeks. The pressure is mounting on the government to act. Many women have remained anonymous out of fear that their claims won't be taken into account. All eyes are now on the defamation case, which held its first hearing on Thursday. Ramani faces up to 2 years in jail if she is found guilty. Akbar faces no charges. The statute of limitations has expired on the acts in question.
Shatapa Paul, you yourself have crossed paths with M.K. Akbar.
Yes, I have. Around 7 years ago, he came on board as the editor of a magazine in India that I was working for. And over a period of 6 to 8 months, I had a few run-ins with him. And there was inappropriate language used, innuendos, invitations to go beyond one's normal journalistic responsibilities. He was quite direct about what he expected of young journalists and young women. And when I refused and I started making excuses, meetings are too late, so I'd rather not go for a meeting which is at 11 at night in a hotel. I started facing the music in my professional, on the professional front. A lot of my stories were getting discarded. They were not getting approved. There was a lot of professional frustration that was setting in, and I used to receive messages saying that, you should know if your career is more important or not. So there was a bit of coercion. Of course, there are some women who have very horrific accounts of how he even crossed the physical boundary, and there was sexual assault and sexual molestation as well.
When Priya Ramani wrote that piece for the Indian edition of Vogue, it was last year. She didn't name him publicly at the time. Did you at the time know that was him?
I've been battling this extremely traumatic experience which happened to me 7 or 8 years ago. And, when you feel fear of that sort, when you feel coerced, I felt so frustrated that I actually quit that job and I asked for another job and I shifted, and I was 26 years old at that time. Since then, till the time that I came out, I have battled wanting to come out against him, but he's always been a very powerful, influential journalist and influential editor. And of course, in the last 3 years, he's been a minister. So, when Priya wrote it, of course, I knew it was him. And when she came out on Twitter on October 8th, I knew that even I had to back her claim, because these were serious allegations against a minister in the government. And obviously, he was someone that we had to call out. We as journalists, we talk about women empowerment, we talk about safer work environments, and we've been reporting on the Me Too movement, which happened in the US, and we felt some impact of that in India as well last year. So it was only fair and ethical to stand up with the other ladies and back their accounts.
And what's your reaction to the fact that it is Priya Ramani who took that decision to out him, who's the one on trial today?
Well, the idea is that there are a lot of legal experts who are looking at the nuances. Why a case against Priya Ramani and not the rest of us who have spoken against him? We've made, our allegations, some of the women's allegations, it's about sexual assault, molestation. Those are even more serious charges on a minister of a country. But we figured that Priya was the first one who spoke about it. She kind of set the conversation rolling. Also, legally, at least in India, they feel that it was an easier case for MJ Akbar to take on, because in the other cases, there is that whole sexual assault and molestation. They're very serious charges. So legally, they feel that this was the first case that they would go. Obviously, it was a way of intimidating us, a man of so much of power and influence, with a big law firm backing him, taking on a journalist. It was a very silent message to all of us that, you better back down. But I'm so glad. All of us, I think, stuck together. We stood our ground, and we've been supporting Priya from the time that the defamation suit, the criminal defamation suit, that is the worrying part. It is a criminal defamation suit, and we hope that Mr. Akbar withdraws it, because there's a lot of pressure coming from various parts of the civil society, including from the Editors Guild of India. They've issued a statement reminding Mr. Akbar that he's a veteran editor, and he would never, ever, in normal circumstances, ever support something like a criminal defamation case against a journalist of all people. And there has been support, coming from the bureaucrats, the retired bureaucrats of the country, from the Press Trust of India, from the Indian Women Press Association, from the South Asian Journalist Association. Everybody has been unitedly, they are pushing and trying that this criminal defamation case is withdrawn.
Yeah, in Priya Ramani's article in Vogue last year, she writes the following. She says, sure, there are many male bosses who don't think of us as their personal harem, but I haven't met too many who are ready to stand up with us and call out your misogyny. It doesn't matter. There are more brave women now who are not scared to point out the monster in the suit. We'll get you all one day, was her conclusion. Again, that article was written, Ingrid Therwad, last year. And now that name is out, but it's not the only one.
No. So everybody's saying that India's facing a Me Too moment right now, and it is true. There is a feeling of empowerment amongst many Indian women after what happened in the US last year. But some things have been going on in India for quite some time, for a longer period, actually. It's not the first time a woman comes out, a female journalist, and accuses her boss of rape or molestation or sexual harassment. There was the Tejpal case in 2013, 5 years ago. Tarun Tejpal was eventually accused of rape and spent some time in jail. And Tehelka, the publication he headed, which was a leading publication, completely went down after that. And last year, about a year ago, a young academic published a name of sexual predators in academia. So India's had its Weinstein moment. It had many Weinstein moments. It's a very large country.
But a government minister resigning?
No, this is a first. You are right. And this is the first time that women are not only coming forth, but they are telling the story. The stories in the plural sense, actually. Last year, only the names came out. This year, names are coming out, and not just Akbar's name. We're focusing right now on the story of this minister because he's the most powerful of them all. But really, I mean, there's a series of sexual predators who've been outed in the past few days in India. But this time, what's new is that it's not only the names, it's the stories as well. And as someone was writing today in the Indian press, what it shows is the elephant in the room, which is the level of sexual harassment in the workplace in India.
Vidisha Mishra, our correspondent in Delhi, Mandakini Galot, putting a timeline on this. She says in the past 2 weeks, there's been an explosion of women speaking out. Why?
Well, I think the speaker before me was right that this movement has sort of been building up in India. So you're right in saying that in the past 2 weeks, there's sort of been an explosion on social media, but we have to realize that the momentum has slowly been building up. As she rightly mentioned, that there was a list of academics, or so to say, predatory academics that was published last year. And even before that, in 2013, when we had the anti-sexual harassment law actually come into effect, there was a lot of voices that sort of led to those things to happen as well. But what happened in the last 2 weeks is that women are finally coming out in large numbers to not just point towards things that have happened to them, but to actually take names. And there's a sense of safety in numbers. I think social media has a role to play in this, that finally we're at a stage where people are not only fixated on the evidence, because in the past, the debate has sort of always been, every time a woman comes forward with a story, her voice is drowned by people who ask for evidence, which oftentimes she's not able to supply. So this is the first time where women are sharing stories and not essentially just supplying evidence, and people are listening to those stories. So in that way, social media, Twitter, which in the past had been a cause of harassment, because as you know, Twitter also has a bullying and gender-based violence problem. Twitter has sort of become a safe haven for women, where they're sort of finding each other, supporting each other, and creating that space where they can finally come forward and tell their stories, which wasn't there earlier. And there is an audience for that now.
Vidisha, I have to ask you, because if there has been this explosion in the past 2 weeks, is part of it people watching what was going on across the oceans in the United States, those hearings for that U.S. Supreme Court Judge Brett Kavanaugh?
I wouldn't say there's one particular example that sort of influenced the movement, but yes, of course, the climate in totality is changing because, of course, what's been happening in Hollywood in the over the last year does have, and because of social media we're also connected, that does have an impact. But then, as I said, these developments in India, they've sort of been building up slowly over the past 2 years as well. So while the international climate does impact what's going on in India at the moment, that wouldn't be the only cause. So with the Kavanaugh hearings, for example, of course, there's a lot of people on Twitter who've been following the stories, and we in India also feel the same rage because women in India have also have had those similar experiences. So there's a shared experience across the world that women have, but in India, the context is very specific. Only about 29% of women in India have access to the internet. So there's like that we have to make sure that we always realize that a lot of the changes that happen in India sort of happen from the ground and they sort of build slowly over time.
You heard Shitwapa Polak tell her story of her encounters with MK Akbar. Your thoughts before we go to the break, Vidisha, on the fact that, well, Wednesday he resigns and Thursday the opening of her trial.
Right. And we also have to remember that while he resigns from his post as a junior minister, he's still a member of the parliament. And the trial starts soon. And as a lot of people in the media and on social media have been saying, it's essentially a very powerful man and all of the women in the country and a lot of men who support her. So the trial starts, and Priya Ramani has a lot of support of all the people. And essentially, this case will go to show cases of sexual harassment are not being taken lightly by the general public in India.
When we come back, we're going to take a look at how it's moving, as you were saying, across social strata, not just among the upwardly mobile, but across Indian society, views on this matter. Stay with us. You're watching the France 24 debate. Welcome back, or welcome if you're just joining us. It's the France 24 debate. We're speaking the day after a government minister in India resigned to, he says, clear his name against accusations that have been launched by at least 20 women when it comes to sexual harassment in the past. He's a former newspaperman, an academic, also with us to talk about it. Shitwapa Paul, founder and editor of New Crop, who joins us from Delhi and who earlier told us about her own run-in with MK Akbar. Also with us from the Indian capital, Vidisha Mishra, Associate Fellow at the Observer Research Foundation. Welcome back as well to Ingrid Thurwat, journalist at the French news weekly Courrier International, the magazine that brings you the best of the world's press. In the past couple of weeks, we're talking about this politician who has quit his post as minister, but as Vidisha Mishra was pointing out, not as member of parliament yet. In the past couple of weeks, Bollywood actresses have raised allegations of sexual harassment. We saw a couple of days ago that the filming of a comedy is in doubt after actor Akshay Kumar decided that he would walk out over allegations against the producer, Sajid Khan, allegations brought by 3 women. And there is a parallel, Shitwapa Paul, because the Me Too movement went viral in the United States when it was accusations against a producer, a Hollywood mogul. And now it seems as though Bollywood has been a big trigger in all of this.
Absolutely. I mean, the Me Too movement has really singed Bollywood in the last few weeks. We've seen a number of big names, a number of respected names of the industry have had accusations flung at them, and they're all credible accounts. Again, they're very in detail. Many of these complainants are actually, also going down the legal route. after making allegations, they haven't stopped there. They are seeking recourse. But definitely, we do see a bit of an impact of what started in the US. And as one of the speakers correctly said, even last year, India did, kind of start discussing Me Too. There was a list of academics who, their names were released, but that was it. This time, of course, what we are seeing this month, what we are seeing with the minister stepping down, this is definitely, I would say, one of the peaks of the Me Too movement in India. And it bodes very well for us, because now we will start, we are going to start discussing about more stringent laws. How can we make the workplace safer, both for men and for women? The government has constituted a group of ministers, and they're supposed to, submit their report in 3 months and talk about the existing laws and what can be done to make it even more conducive for people to come forward and get speedy justice, even if it's a few years later. So these are very positive happenings for the country.
Yeah, the government making that announcement this Thursday. Shatapa, where would you start? What is the most pressing need where the government should start?
See, the Vishaka guidelines, and the POSH guidelines, which we follow in the country about, to try to prevent sexual harassment at the workplace, unfortunately is not followed by most organizations. Even if they have an internal complaints committee, it's there just in name. There are some accounts of women who've come forward with sexual harassment cases. They had gone to the committee, but the committee did not take their allegation or their complaint seriously. Now, all this is likely to change. You will be taking these complaints seriously. They will be dealt with in a more proactive manner. Irrespective of fear or favor, they will be dealt with in an unbiased way. We are hoping that with what's happening with the Me Too movement and the government making this announcement, these aspects of the law will be strengthened more. And, the Women and Child Development Minister in India, Maneka Gandhi, she's in fact responded to a letter from women journalists who've asked her to ensure that every media organization, for starters, has a proper internal complaints committee, and going forward this will become something that other companies, both public and private, will have to follow. So that's a very positive step, because this will ensure that there are safer working environments. Even if there's a complaint, that complaint will be dealt with in a proactive, unbiased manner.
Getting authorities to take the complaint seriously. Mm-hmm. Here in France, we witnessed last year when the Me Too movement happened, police stations were suddenly swamped with people coming forward and with complaints of abuse and harassment, which they hadn't had before. Yeah. They said in many instances they weren't properly trained for it. What would you say, Ingrid Thera, based on the experience we've had in this country, how would you extrapolate from that for what happens in a nation of 1.1 billion people?
Well, I think it's the other way that we should be thinking. We should be looking at India and take a few lessons from what's happening in India. Nothing's happened in French cinema so far. I mean, we've had rumors and allegations. We've had actresses coming forward and others defending
how do you explain that?
Molesters. So there's obviously a very big problem with sexual harassment in this country, and we do well not to give lessons to the rest of the world about that.
Why are the French behind the Indians then?
Well, it's not a competition, but what is really important, because since we're talking about India, is to remember that the history of feminism in India is a very long history. This doesn't come out of nothing. The feminist movement in India has a very long history, one that actually predates the feminist movements in France. And what we are witnessing today is a new wave of feminism, which is, a source of great hope. Young women and less young women in India are now looking at what's happening in the rest of the world, using new tools, technological tools, and traditional means of contest and dissent to protest, and this is very refreshing. This is very new. This is a global phenomenon, and France is a bit behind. I feel. I think we should we'd be better off if we got some inspiration from India. or the US.
Vidisha Mishra, let me get your reaction to something we just heard there from Ingrid, that Indians using the technological tools at their disposal. How much is the arrival of the digital age, the technology, how much does that help or empower women?
So, as I also said earlier, and I would agree with what I just heard, India does have a very sophisticated and long women's movement. So, in that way, technology has helped to an extent, in the sense that social media has made it easier for people to mobilize communities and to gather around causes. So, to that extent, it has helped. But I am sort of skeptical every time there's a lot of there's too much focus on how social media or technology in general helps women's movements. And that is mainly because I feel that the advent of technology, because so far there's not been adequate focus on how gender relations are impacted by it. It has gone unchecked, the impact of it. So as I was saying earlier, Twitter was really the hotbed of abuse and gender-based violence earlier, before the Me Too movement and the Time's Up movement sort of caught on. Because even now, all of these incredible women who are coming out with these their stories are at the receiving end of a lot of unchecked abuse. So there are rape threats and worse and things like that. So in a way, it's a double-edged sword. Technology can be empowering, but then, as I said, how many people actually have access to that technology? That's very important. At the moment in India, that percentage is not that high. It is getting there, but not currently. And access is not the only thing. How many people then also sort of know how to engage with this technology? And that actually includes, policy people and our formal institutions like the police, for example. It's still very new in India. If somebody complains of receiving a rape threat or some sort of violent threat online, a lot of police professionals even don't know how to deal with these cases. So we're sort of getting there because more and more women are sort of coming on social media. They have access, and as I said, it's also being used for for mobilizing for these causes, and it's helping in that way. But at the same time, I think we should be very careful and not overestimate what technology can do.
All right, there's technology, there's cyberbullying, there's workplace harassment, and then there are age-old religious beliefs concerning men and women. The Indian Supreme Court this week ordering a temple in Kerala state to lift its centuries-old ban on women of menstruating age being able to enter. Aaron Agunke has that story.
Empty streets, deserted businesses, and vehicles stranded due to threats and roadblocks. Conservative Hindus in Kerala will seemingly stop at nothing to prevent women from worshiping in an ancient Hindu temple. On Thursday, they declared a 12-hour shutdown of local businesses.
Because of the protests against women entering Sabarimala temple following the Supreme Court order, the strike in Kerala has been declared.
Ahead of the strike, local Hindu groups warned taxis and bus drivers not to take worshippers to the site, threatening to attack their vehicles if they defied the orders. This comes a day after Hindu hardliners blocked women from entering the Sabarimala temple. Women over the age of 10, considered to be of menstruating age, had long been prohibited from accessing the hilltop shrine. Many Hindu traditionalists believe menstruating women are impure. But last month, India's Supreme Court overturned the ban, ruling that it infringed upon the right to worship. The move sparked outrage among conservative Hindu groups. Hundreds of protesters took to the streets, intimidating women who attempted to enter the temple. A handful of rioters attacked dozens of people, including journalists and police officers. Refusing to back down to the violent protests, Kerala's communist government has vowed to uphold the ruling, deploying hundreds of police officers to ensure access to the shrine.
Shatapa Paul, what's your take on that standoff?
It's a very delicate situation here in India. The Apex Court, of course, has allowed women to go there to the Sanctum Sanctorum and worship. However, it's been 2 days that the temple's been open, and women have not been allowed in. Women journalists, including a foreign journalist, was was heckled and attacked. It's quite a delicate matter here in India. It's extremely religious. It shows unfortunate to say this, but the police and the state are supposed to protect and give security to the women, but they have clearly also failed at doing this.
It's a tough one because I've been reading, Shatapa, women on both sides of the arguments. I'm saying I'm perfectly fine with not being allowed to enter that temple.
Well, it's a thing of religion and tradition, but then there are progressive voices who are talking about the rights of women. I mean, why should we hold on to extremely old, archaic rules which kind of discriminate between genders? We are in 2018. Women are contributing towards the GDP of a country. How can we be told where we should go and where we should not? So this extremely so-called patriarchal stance that is there in certain sections, including the Sabarimala temple, of course, we would definitely want it to be removed. We deserve to be able to go and worship wherever that we may want to, and these rules don't exist in other parts of at least the developed world. And I think a large majority of Indians do want to keep pace with that. But having said that, it is religion. There is always a matter of taking the consideration of the majority that is there. Unfortunately, women who do want it, or men who do support the women, are slightly outnumbered. Even though the apex court, the Supreme Court of India, it's the highest judicial body of our country, has struck down this law and allowed women to go into the temple. As I said, it's been over 48 hours and no woman has been able to step inside.
Vidisha Mishra, what's the trend in India? Next year there's a general election. The party in power is one that is a Hindu nationalist party, the BJP. What's the trend when it comes to these conservative values?
So it's always tricky to ascertain trends in India, given what a big country it is. And even in that, if you look at women, it's not a homogeneous sort of category that it'll be easy to draw trends. As you mentioned earlier, some women also express views that they're okay with not entering Sabarimala. It's because women are also socialized in the same society. We're not sort of independent of the same patriarchal values that the rest of the society has. So I wouldn't be comfortable saying that there's a one general trend in India, but I can say that as far as women's issues are concerned, as far as safety of women, women's right to work without being harassed, as far as these topics are concerned, there is growing awareness. Now, whether this has an impact in the general elections or not would be too much of a leap of faith, in my opinion. I would want it to make an impact, but would it actually make an impact on the ground?
What about day to day? When you take public transportation, when you go to work, do you feel as though there is that growing awareness that you describe?
Absolutely. Again, I live in New Delhi, so to sort of to see the atmosphere here, I would want to sort of keep it independent from what's happening in the rest of the country, because I feel that people in the capital are still a little bit more connected with the policy discourse and all of that. But I do take public transport, and if I'm sitting in Uber, I can start talking to the driver, and we sometimes have conversations about how he thinks it's completely okay to pick up women who are drinking and then drop them safely back home. His views are changing, because earlier women who were drinking or traveling back alone at night were seen as women who were transgressing, right? That is not happening. At least views are changing. But then again, it's a big country. There's a lot of different intersectionalities. So it wouldn't be wise to draw broad conclusions.
Ingrid Terwat, you were saying that the French were behind the curve when it comes to this.
Oh, yeah.
The change in mentality, do you feel it more when you're here or when you're there?
I feel it more in India. Yes. But,
Despite what, because we had this
I think,
anti-harassment law that's been put in against catcalling, all these.
I think
all that has come in the past year.
It's very difficult to compare two countries that are so different and where rights and everyday life for ordinary women are extremely different experiences. And it's very difficult, as Vidisha very rightly pointed out, to talk about India as an homogenous place, because it's a very large country with women facing very different experiences. What I'd like to point out is the impact of the Supreme Court. Vidisha is completely right when she tells you that it's impossible to draw conclusions as to the impact of all this on the next general election. But what we can say is that the Supreme Court of India plays a very important role right now in safeguarding the Indian Constitution and the fundamental freedoms that are inscribed in the constitutions. And amongst these freedoms and these rights and these values are gender equality and non-discrimination. It's very interesting also to see that the Apex Court of India safeguards the constitution and Indian democracy at a time when it's being threatened, when democracy is more and more understood not as what it should be, but as a dictatorship of the majority, which is not the case. The Apex Court of India, the Supreme Court of India, defends the rights, the equality of rights of women, of LGBTs, of Muslims, of all the categories of the population in India who are being discriminated against by the current government, or under the current government. So it says something very reassuring about the judicial power and about the resilience of Indian democracy as well. And now, as to the outcome of next year's election, I really don't know. But
But the legitimacy of India's highest court is, of course, an important point to underline, one that's not lost to many of our viewers watching from other countries. Shutapa Paul, one final question, and I'll put it to you, which is you heard the words of Vidisha Mishra, feeling as though she's sensing that change. You bravely described to us earlier how hard it was to overcome the trauma of being sexually harassed. Do you feel safer?
Yes, definitely. 8 years later, and 30 plus women on my side, and all of us together talking about this has definitely made me feel safer. I would say I'm more hopeful that I will feel safer. And even though here in India, many people are terming the Me Too movement as an elite urban movement, I strongly believe that any changes that are brought into the workplace right now will definitely, the effects of it will definitely percolate to the tier 2, tier 3 cities, to the rural areas. See, within India, there are two Indias, There is the Indian woman who's privileged, who's had all the freedoms that anybody can wish for, and then there is the other India, where women still are struggling to find their voice. If through our movement, if through Me Too, we can bring about change in the real space, offline, not social media alone, we actually affect change in the law that prevents sexual harassment. I'm hopeful, call me an idealist, but I hope that these changes will slowly start percolating to the tier 2, tier 3 towns, to the rural areas, and companies, both public and private. So I'm quite hopeful that this change which has happened takes some solid steps and eventually makes us feel safer.
Shutapa Paul, many thanks for speaking out and for speaking with us here on France 24. I want to thank as well Vidisha Mishra for joining us from Delhi. Ingrid Therwat, stay with us. Media Watch is next. We say hello to James Creedon.
Hi, Francois. So obviously, big debate in the Indian media about this story, and just to start with, those who are very optimistic about the movement, as you would expect, that's a large part of the debate. This is in the Indian Express, an exit and a beginning. So MJ Akbar's resignation from the Union government is a seminal moment in India's her story as opposed to history. So what he says in this article is that the testimonies have shattered the silence that have surrounded sexual harassment in India, with every woman thinking she was alone and had to either continue to suffer in silence or fight the battle on her own. So I guess a cultural shift and a sense of a common struggle. And today, even in the regional media, of course, this was a battle that started off in the media. Where the problem may be rampant, people will know that they're not alone. Hopefully, Me Too will restrain potential predators as well. So the notion that there would be a disincentive for people to act because of a sense that there could be a reaction. This will be a change more far-reaching than an enactment of any law. So the cultural shift, I suppose, in ideas. That's very much echoed in this piece in The Print by Nandita Singh. Hang in there, women, a word of encouragement to those who are leading, I suppose, the online and not just online but offline struggle. MJ Akbar is a victory, but the Me Too fight is just starting. And again, here vaunting the use of the hashtag and the use of those two simple words, Me Too. And Nandita Singh talks about a whole generation that have learnt activism, for example, in the comments section of Facebook, and that there's been this slow building of confidence, I suppose, in women's voices and the ability to speak out about issues such as this. A union minister has resigned without a single march or hunger strike or overnight sit-in, all because of a large-scale mobilisation on the internet. We tweeted our revolution, but not to its end. Now, she does strike a word of caution here as well, saying, but in a country like ours, the fight against sexual conservatism has to make its way through layers of structural and societal hurdles. It's actually much more complicated. So I guess you're getting the picture that in India, certainly it's a more complex picture than what we saw in the Me Too movement as it started, I suppose, in the US. And indeed, there are several articles drawing attention to, for example, domestic workers who perhaps wouldn't even have identified sexual harassment for being what it is. There's a culture gap there, an education gap as well, and a fear that indeed, if you were to report it, that there could be repercussions, accusations of theft and whatnot. So a lot of people just simply won't report sexual harassment, A, because they mightn't identify it as such, and B, just out of a culture of fear. And indeed, this article also cites research that was done by Oxfam India in 2012, saying that workplace harassment affects labourers, women labourers, at 29%. So these are the biggest categories of women affected by sexual harassment. Domestic workers at 23%, and small-scale manufacturing unit workers at 16%. So I guess...
So the white-collar workers is just a minority of it.
That's right. And I suppose it's going to take more time maybe and a lot more effort for that trickle-down effect to happen. So that seems to be one aspect that's very much coming through. The economics of exploitation as well, that's mentioned in this headline here, touching on similar ideas. Now, some I suppose being a little, while there is a lot of optimism about this being the beginning of something, there are also articles saying, is it already beginning to die out? That there is a sense, as we saw with Me Too in the US and elsewhere, that it was going too far, that people were taking advantage of this movement. And so there's a sense here that it could be slowing down somewhat out of a fear of its excesses. But I think that's definitely just one small aspect of the debate. Most people feel that this is a very good thing. And obviously the online aspect, we didn't even get to that, but hashtags such as She the People and Me Too India, Me Too, all drawing attention to this. And Time's Up as well, we're seeing that hashtag being used in the Indian context also.
All right, James Creedon, I want to thank you. I want to thank our panel once again. Thank you for joining us here in the France 24 debate.